Okay, good evening, everyone. Anybody out there? Good evening, everyone. That's better. It's a communication function here we got to do. So here's the way we thought we'd do the run of show, as we call it here close to Hollywood.
Makes me feel like I'm in Los Angeles.
And that's what we wanted. That's what we wanted. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, hopefully to provoke our guests and get the conversation going. And then I will open it up to questions from the floor. And when you have questions, I will invite you to step to the microphone and identify yourself and then ask the question. So that's sort of the run of show. So here's the first question I have for our two esteemed guests. I read the reviews, many of the reviews for the book. And I said, oh God, not another one of those. And that struck me because you read a lot of books these days about the transformative role of technology. If we drop a laptop into a village, it will transform social relations. If we can just get everybody linked up, all shall be resolved. And in some ways, much to my disappointment, because I was looking for a great argument with my two friends here, the book is not like that at all. It's actually much more nuanced and balanced between social forces on the one hand and institutional forces and history and culture, and how the technology drops into those kinds of situations and affects the outcomes. But they point out that good guys and bad guys can have access to the technology. So my question is, how the hell did you get that balance right? What did you bring to it that allowed you to do that, Eric?
We've been working on this for a couple of years, and when we started, we didn't quite know where we were going to end up. And we sort of come to a view that in the next 5 to 10 years, another 5 billion people are going to join the internet. These are people from a lot of countries that we've not visited, even Jared and I. And this will be transformative on them in a way that you cannot imagine. They're going to go from abject poverty, no textbooks, no information, rote learning, to the world's information in their own language, education, medicine, healthcare. You talk to these people, and your heart goes out. And all of a sudden, with this single device, they're going to know all of this. This is going to happen. It's a core aspect of the empowerment of the internet and mobile devices. It will, of course, also empower bad people as well as good people. And governments and citizens and companies will all react to this in ways that we take through, as you said. And we worry about governments doing a whole bunch of things. Jared?
Well, and if you think about the next 5 billion people that are connecting to the internet, look at where they live. They live in parts of the world where there's conflict, instability, where the model of governance is autocratic and repressive. They're going to encounter a unique set of challenges with tools that we're all familiar with every single day in the future, and it's going to look very different than the first 2 billion people that are already connected. So the narrative of this book, in a lot of respects, was the two of us traveling to 30-plus countries together over the last several years to meet these future users, to understand some of the challenges they're encountering with or without technology, and to try to understand what would get worse, what would get better, because you have to have an honest conversation about what awaits us. The world's not perfect. It's very easy to be optimistic, but it's dishonest.
And I think, to summarize some of the points that we've sort of come to, it's true that terrorists will have access to information they wouldn't before, but it will be very difficult for terrorists to evade the tracking and the surveillance and so forth that the police can do. It's very difficult to do that in a digital world without being caught. We have lots of examples of that. Governments that are going to be threatened by empowering citizens are going to initially turn off the internet, which is a real wake-up call to the citizens and a mistake. And then once they discover that's a mistake, they're going to start filtering information that they don't like. And the citizens will then come back trying to bring that information back. And various forms of internal civil war about information will happen. And in fact, governments will engage in complicated cyber war even while they're friendly in the physical space. And we talk a lot about that in the book.
One of the things that struck me in reading the book, and before I got the hard copy, which I was delighted to get, I had to download it on this thing. So I'm bimodal. I read half of it on this and the other half here. So I figure I'm using all sorts of platforms. The question I would pose to you is that you identify sort of 3 groups, those at the top of society, those at the middle of society, and those at the bottom of society. And rather than saying all of the impacts are going to be the same, all of the uses are going to be the same, you actually differentiate and say, let's not say that someone living in Bel Air is going to have the same reaction or use it in the same way as someone living in Watts. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you thought about that, how you came to that conclusion, and maybe think about the implications for those three groups.
Let's talk about the wealthy information communities, these Bel Air and many others in America and in the Western world. These are people who are going to have enormous improvements in their daily lives. When you wake up in the morning, there'll be some screen on the wall. It'll say, you know, good morning, Eric, and I'll say, do I have to get up? And it'll say, no. You can go back to sleep. We've scanned all the things you're doing.
Can you promise that all of our screens will say that?
Well, in your case,
I think
Dean,
that's what we're
the problem of being a dean is there's always a threat.
There's always a threat.
some problem. But what will happen is it'll analyze what's going on. You'll have given it permission to look at your schedule. It'll understand what sort of problems that you're facing, and it'll do an analysis for you. And it'll help organize your world. Think of it as an infinitely powerful, infinitely intelligent personal digital assistant. And people will choose this because their lives will get a lot easier. It'll predict a traffic jam. It'll say, Eric, you're always late to the LAX airport, and the traffic on the 405 is terrible. If you don't leave right now, there's no flight for the next week. Get out of bed. And these sorts of things.
Now, of course, some of the places that we traveled in sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, Latin America, it's very clear that power and electricity problems are going to persist into the future. Food shortages, water shortages, violence, all these things will persist. Technology can help in terms of ushering in a new era of information, but it's certainly not a silver bullet. And so the distinction that we make is everybody's lives get better because of technology. There's no country in the world that's worse off as a result of the internet's arrival. It's just that it's going to be different degrees of assistance that individuals will get.
And the sad thing, by the way, is that I grew up with the assumption that the internet was a great leveler, and that you'd see a global middle class that would somehow erase all of these distinctions that we are all so used to. All of us are optimists with respect to the human condition, that everyone's raised up equally. But in fact, it's not the case. That in the developing world, the sort of bottom of the pyramid, which is where most people are, they're going to struggle to get to basic connectivity. It's life-changing for them, while we're busy arguing over how fast is our fiber optic connection.
And arguably, it is the case, for example, in the United States. I'm not making causality here, but I'm suggesting the correspondence that the more connectivity is happening at the same time that we're seeing greater and greater inequalities in the United States of America. And global connectivity is happening at the same time that we're seeing growing gaps between the poorest countries and the richest countries. So I'm not suggesting causality, but I'm making your point, I think, Eric, in a slightly different way, which is that it's not a panacea. And that these are enablers, we can do other things. But I want to, because I know that both of you have been to Rwanda. You've both been to Nigeria. Very different kind of environment than we're in today here in California. So I think we would have a good sense of how it's going to help our life. If you're in Mushin in Lagos, or Surulere in Lagos, or if you're in Rwanda, maybe you could say a little bit about the impact in those countries of the implications, if you will, of your book.
Well, the way to, first of all, there's an infinite number of examples, and in some respects, it matters what demographic you're talking about. So let's start with young people, right? The vast majority of the next 5 billion are going to be young. How do they learn? They learn through rote memorization in broken schools. And if you believe, as we do, that the source of many of the world's problems are rooted in bad educational systems, every young person with a smartphone in their hand is going to be able to challenge educational systems built on memorization with critical thinking just by virtue of their ability to informally learn over a mobile device. 5 billion people is 5 billion new witnesses who can capture atrocities on film, who can take photos, who even if the networks are shut down can still share them peer-to-peer. So progress in education, progress in witnessing and accountability, these are just some of the examples.